Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Jennifer, and this is the first video or audio of a new series that I'm starting called If You Could See How I Feel. And this is going to be a series devoted to the grappling of dealing with invisible illness and the ups and downs of that and all the different ramifications psychologically and physically, emotionally, mentally, that people with invisible illnesses deal with. And just to kind of give a little bit of a background as to why I'm wanting to do this, I'd certainly been aware of the concept of invisible illnesses. I'd been a clinician, a mental health clinician for 26 years. So I was very well versed, especially in mental health disorders that weren't necessarily visible to people. If there weren't kind of strange behaviors or things like that, a lot of people are left suffering in silence with a lot of mental health disorders. So I was always aware of it. But until it happened to me, I just think that's one of those things. I think that no matter how empathic or compassionate you are, unless you start wearing the cloak of an invisible illness, it's really hard to grasp all the nuances of what that means in terms of how it alters your life, your relationships, and some of the secondary trauma that comes with it, because you don't have a cast on your leg. You don't have something visible to show people. You're not necessarily in a wheelchair. There's not a crutch. There's nothing that would necessarily signal to people that you are struggling. And so I'm going to talk a lot about, like I said, all the different dynamics of it. And because what has happened to me really falls in the realm of the mental, emotional, and because that's my background, that's going to be probably where I spend the majority of time, obviously, is dealing with, kind of the impact of invisible illness as it relates to kind of mental health issues. But I feel like it applies across the board in terms of some of the same constructs and some of the same, things that people have to navigate in order to stay in their lives. And, I was thinking about kind of, for me, I've become kind of like functionally dysfunctional, if that makes sense. Like, to the outside world, for the most part, I look very functional, but the amount of effort that goes into maintaining that is exhausting. And it's not something I would have even believed I was capable of until it happened to me. And it's obviously made me look at the world very differently in terms of how many people around me are dealing with something that I can't see. And then talk about a lesson in increasing empathy, which is another piece that we'll talk about in this. But, as I'm talking about invisible illnesses, I'm talking about, let's just say, anxiety, all the various forms of anxiety that I have now come to understand and I've been studying, whether it's depersonalization, derealization, panic attacks, unwanted intrusive thoughts, general sense of unease or dis-ease, doom, gloom, dread type feelings, different phobias like agoraphobia, afraid to leave your home, different specific phobias, OCD, feelings of depression and depletion. Kind of the list goes on. And then obviously also in the realm of mental health disorders, talking about people that maybe have things like bipolar or schizophrenia, schizoaffective, and maybe they're the way it manifests is somewhat managed. And so the world at large wouldn't necessarily see them acting in a way that would tip anybody off, but they don't know kind of what's going on and the amount of effort that it's taking to just kind of appear normal and to appear okay. PTSD, like I said, all forms of anxiety, different forms of depression, personality disorders. And again, the one that got me was and the one that I am really interested in, obviously, is I had an adverse reaction to a medication. The numbers of people that have had adverse reactions to steroids, antibiotics, psychotropic medications, and a lot of those manifestations are invisible. Sometimes they become visible, are things like akathisia, where you're pacing, or certain dystonias, where you have certain movements. But a lot of what people are left with are kind of central nervous system injuries, and those are invisible illnesses. So anything that kind of creates a central nervous system injury, is kind of been where I've been putting the focus of my attention, because that's what happened to me a couple of years ago that then led to a cascade of symptoms, mostly invisible, that cast me not only into like a medical no man's land, but into like a societal no man's land where, I didn't realize I had never really had to put a lot of effort into showing up in my life in terms of I felt good, mentally and physically. Even during stressful times, I could rally, and I never had to give much thought to, how can I show up today? How can I put one foot in front of the other? How can I, go about my day and my life and try to be strong for my family and my friends or myself, and suddenly this opened up a world for me of looking at everybody very differently. And of course, if we're thinking about other invisible illnesses, I mean, there's anything from, what rheumatoid arthritis to fibromyalgia, diabetes, certain stages of MS, different digestive issues like Crohn's disease, IBS, celiac disease, various pain conditions, chronic pain, people that have chronic back pain, neck pain, various chronic pain conditions, people that have certain allergies and food sensitivities, multiple chemical sensitivities, bladder stuff like interstitial cystitis, lupus, Lyme disease, vertigo, endometriosis, long-term COVID, certain cancers. The people that, we talked about, there was a bunch written about the people that, the first responders of 9/11 and how all the fallout they've had in terms of health conditions as a result of this, mentally and physically. And again, a lot of times, unless somebody is literally has some sort of physical, visible crutch, literally and figuratively, a cast, a wheelchair, a crutch, a scar, a bandage, whatever. It just opened my eyes to what has been in front of me for the last 51 years, that until a couple years ago, I just didn't grasp the pervasiveness of it and just what people go through, and I started looking into it, and what I was reading was that or sleep disorders are another one, a big one that I've come across with folks, but basically like one in two Americans, so 50% of Americans have some sort of chronic medical condition that would be considered invisible. Now that's a lot, but again, I just named off a whole bunch of things, right? And that was, 25 or 30 out of what are probably 1,000 different invisible conditions. Now, only 10%, I shouldn't say only 10%, because 10% of America is a lot of people. 10% of Americans actually have an invisible illness disability where it actually has impacted one or more areas of their lives. They can't work, they can't parent, whatever it is, they can't go to school, that type of thing. So they actually have a documented disability. It's 10% of Americans. But, and I want to talk about those people as well. Invisible illness is invisible illness. But I'm also thinking about the people a lot of people that I've met over the last couple of years that don't really qualify for a disability. Either they don't qualify for how, the government deems a disability, or they can kind of fake it enough, or they're terrified of being judged. And I can't tell you the number of calls and emails I've been getting just even here in the last 6 months from people that are struggling with various forms of depression and anxiety, stress-related illnesses, and they are telling me, please don't, I would never anyway, but they would say, please don't let anyone know. I have little children. I don't want them to be ostracized. I don't want to be known as the parent with depression or the parent with anxiety. I don't want to be, I don't want people to know what I'm grappling with. And because I don't want it to affect my marriage or my children or my family. I don't want to lose my job. I can't lose my job. I'm a single parent. Whatever it is. And so they're kind of pushing through with this invisible illness. And like I said, for me, just again, a little bit of background about my story is, again, I've been a mental health clinician for 26 years. Did my master's in Houston. I did my PhD up in Massachusetts. Worked in private psychiatric hospitals, residential and inpatient. I've taught at Boston College and University of Houston, and I was in private practice writing a book or trying to write a book when I took an antibiotic, had been perfectly healthy, and was getting the it felt like maybe sinusitis or bronchitis, and took an antibiotic and had an adverse reaction. I had a toxic neurological reaction to an antibiotic, and this has set off going on 6 years now of a cascade of symptoms that kind of remit and then unfortunately were kicked back off by another medication injury, by a benzodiazepine. So I spend a lot of my time, you'll see my videos up top. I have over 100 videos. So if you're somebody who's had a med injury, you might want to look at those. If a lot of people have invisible injuries and illnesses from adverse med reactions, like steroids, antibiotics, psychotropic medications, being on the medication or trying to come off the medication, or being taken off the medication rapidly or cold turkeyed, and that's what kind of kicked off mine. And I have said, the reason I'm calling this "If You Could See How I Feel" is because I would never wish what I have felt in the last year or more on anybody, on my least favorite person. But there have been times I have just wished that somebody could maybe touch my arm and just for 5 minutes kind of feel what I feel, because they would then know that I'm not trying to be lazy, I'm not trying to isolate, I'm not trying to be antisocial, I'm not trying to pull away, I'm not trying to not try my hardest. But because my injury and my illness is invisible, it's really easy to be written off, right? And here's the deal, especially in America, I don't know what it's like in other countries, but in America, even with really serious things like with deaths, right? We have like 3-day bereavement leaves. We don't have a lot of patience for people being down for too long. There's just not a lot for that, which is ironic because I don't think we're aware of how many people are kind of like gritting it through. And I'm not saying we should all just give up and not show up. In fact, I know for me that when on the days that I can, when I push myself, it can be helpful. It can backfire on me, but in the moment, sometimes it can be helpful. Sometimes just because it reminds me of who I am, who I was. But for me, it's important to begin to speak about this. If you could see how I feel. And again, a lot of these videos and audios I'm going to do are going to probably focus more on the psychology and the mental health and the emotional manifestations of this, simply because it's just what I can speak to more directly and from a personal experience. But it relates to all of these other things I'm talking about, because we're going to talk about things like isolation and the secondary trauma of maybe not really being believed, or being kind of seen as lazy, or again not trying hard enough, or malingering or feigning, or being hypochondriacal, and there's some people that do those things. Yes, that's true. But, for myself and the majority of people that I speak to, we would do anything to get our lives back, and for me, there was a real before and after. I know that's not always true for people. Some people are born with invisible illnesses and have to navigate through their lives like that. Or they've dealt with something since, for decades or since childhood. Mine was very much a before and an after. And sometimes that has its own challenges, right? And I'm not saying it has more challenges than a more chronic condition or somebody who's been dealing with it most of their lives. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that for each person it's unique, and the worst kind of pain is your own pain. But it has really opened my eyes to the fact that so many people just suffer in silence out of fear of being shamed or alienated or written off, or feeling like they're a burden, or they're going to be a burden, or again, just in an attempt to just try to live their lives. And I'll never see people the same way that I used to see them. I kind of now give people a lot of credit, and think wow, what might they be going through today? What might they be feeling that they're not showing? I was at Whole Foods later, this afternoon, and I just happened to look up and notice the clerk wince. And I notice this in people now. And then they put on a smile, and they don't tell me about that pain. They don't tell me about that suffering. They just keep powering through. And I'm not saying that's what we should do or we shouldn't do. There's no judgment on my part about that. It's just simply the eye-opening experience of, if you could see how I feel. And the reality is there's so many of us dealing with something, that this is where I kind of go back to Brene Brown's work on vulnerability and shared vulnerability and letting people in as best we can. But again, it's strange because so many of us are dealing with something. But I think there's also this, I know it is for me, even on a good day now, I kind of want to forget about this invisible injury that I have, this invisible illness. I don't want to be reminded of it, because if I'm having a good hour or a good day or a good week, like, I don't want to think about it, and I don't want to think about anybody else's. And so in some ways, it's like I can be incredibly empathic and then almost incredibly selfish at moments too, because I'm like, just let me have this moment of joy. Just let me have this day. I don't want to think about my pain or anybody else's pain. And I think, again, there's probably some human nature in that. But I want to, open this up and do these series of talk about what I'm learning, what I've learned, what I'm continuing to learn, specifically for me about med injury and the manifestations of that look like, severe states of anxiety and other struggles. But holding in mind everybody out there who's dealing with, as I mentioned, those 20, 30 things, there's hundreds and hundreds more, and knowing that you're not alone. And then how do we speak about this? Now, there's been a ton done about invisible illnesses. There's actually an Invisible Illness Awareness Week and people speaking out about it. And there's lots of statistics and things like that. So this is not a new topic, but it is kind of a new topic for me, for sure. And it's, like I said, it's opened my eyes as a clinician differently. Again, spending 26 years working with people with all forms of anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, schizoaffective, bipolar personality struggles, just grappling with emotional and mental struggles. And, as much as I was there with them and really worked to try to be with them in their experience, you can't. And I think that's part of what I've realized about invisible illness too, is like, you can have a village around you, and we need that. We need twinship. We'll talk about the needs we all have, but you kind of go that road alone at the end of the day. You're dealing with chronic pain, no matter how much people love you and are around you, and believe me, that goes a long way. At the end of the day, it's you with that pain. It's you with that intrusive thought. It's you with that fear. It's you with that panic. It's you with that black, smog of depression. It's you with that, burning bladder. It's you with that colitis. It's you with that IBS. It's you with that sleep disorder. I can go on and on, right? But it's again, the worst kind of pain is your own, and we're just not great at acknowledging and giving people the benefit of the doubt. And if there's even any degree of truth to the fact that 1 in 2 Americans have some sort of chronic medical or mental health condition that doesn't necessarily leave them disabled, and all that means is that they are they're not impaired, and they can kind of keep up with their normal tasks of daily living, cleaning themselves, taking care of their homes, feeding themselves, going to work, going to school, taking care of the kids. But again, the sheer numbers of people I've come into contact with as this has started for me, where, oh my God, if anyone knew the effort that went into, a friend of mine trying to take her son to a baseball game, or to show up to throw a birthday party, or to just to get through the day, just to stay vertical and breathing sometimes. I just felt like this was important. And so this is kind of and I've done a lot of talking about benzodiazepine withdrawal, bind, and all of that, and medication injury, and I'm going to continue to be talking about that, and that'll have its own specific set of videos, and I'll continue to do those. But I really wanted to broaden this out a little bit because it's just, again, given me so much more awareness and empathy for the world and what people go through. And another big invisible injury and illness that we don't talk about is grief, right? There's just not a lot of room for grief. And we can kind of pathologize it when we feel like it's gone on too long. We've quantified what we think is a normal amount of time to grieve, and yet I don't know how you do something like that, because with grief can come so many different levels of pain on a physical, mental, spiritual level. So grief is part of this as well as an invisible injury, an invisible illness that, again, we're all walking around this world and a lot of us are limping. And, I lived a lot of years not limping. I realize now what a gift that was, and how what a blessing it was to go that many years without limping mentally or physically, or having to hide what it is to get through a day. And but it's taxing, and it leaves people feeling very alone and isolated. And we talk about, in the age of technology, right, that people feel more isolated than ever. And I think this is an area that goes a long way, is that I think so many people are dealing with issues, and yes, now we have support groups and things like that, and I think that can help a lot of people. But there are still certain invisible illnesses that, outside of that support group, nobody wants to hear about chronic pain conditions. Nobody wants to hear you're depressed again. Nobody wants to hear that, you're afraid you're going to drop your baby and have this weird intrusive thought. Nobody wants to hear that stuff, right? Nobody wants to, everyone, we tend to want to pick ourselves up by our bootstraps. Why aren't you working hard enough? And so much of this is not about effort, Sure, are there individuals among us that aren't doing all they can do, or are maybe milking it? Yeah, but that is by no means the majority. I think it is such a small minority of people. Most of us are out there, working to appear functional at all costs when we have these different things going on. And so it's just a way to slow down and to have some self-compassion for yourself if you're going through this, and if you're not, to increase some empathy and compassion towards other people who might be dealing with all kinds of things. Oh, and let me just throw in, for the females out there, PMS and perimenopause, and holy God, I'm 51, and never in a million years did I expect that I would grapple with some of the stuff I'm grappling with as a result of being perimenopausal. I mean, yeah, I've read about this stuff. Again, I was a clinician for freaking 26 years. I know about this stuff. But until it's your skin, until you are living it, until you are inhabiting the body and the mind that is, holding you hostage, or, poking at you and pricking at you and pulling at you and pushing on you, and it's otherworldly. It can be. And so I'm hoping that I can really come at this like I have with the benzo withdrawal and the med discontinuation stuff, which is being realistic but also very hopeful, but also giving us space to talk about again, what is it like. And I'll probably do my next one. I'll probably start with anxiety, because those are the symptoms that have come full force as a result of my injury to my nervous system. So thanks for listening, guys. I look forward to doing this series. I hope it's helpful, and I hope it can kind of bring us together and help us not feel so alone, and also help increase awareness and give our families a language to understand a little bit better, and Yeah, so we'll just see where this takes us. I have no outline. I'm doing this free form. It's just been something that's on my heart, and I want to talk about it. And again, like I said, if you are dealing with a med reaction, specifically a psychotropic med reaction, you might want to look at the 100 and some odd videos I've done about benzo withdrawal, because they'll probably be quite applicable to what you're going through. I look forward to doing this with you guys. Take care.